Hey everybody, Rob from Karma Comic Chameleon. Today we're looking at a ProRevenge story. New manager makes working stressful. Enjoy working alone with no staff. Let's jump right in. Hello again, Reddit. I've been reading these stories a lot, and while I did post a story about my great-grandfather a while back because I recently heard it from my mother and grandmother, a new story that I had almost forgotten about came flooding back to me recently. The main reason I am remembering this is because of a recent phone call that I took from my current job. This is a long story with some backstory, so bear with me. This story happened over 20 years ago during the late 90s. I was 17 and had just recently gotten a job as a dishwasher at a local summer camp. This was a large camp that was run by a corporation. I won't say the name of the corporation, but there is a very famous song named after them. I had been to this summer camp before as a kid, so I knew the layout of the camp. My job started up on the first week of summer, mid-June, so the kids were already there. I had my interview with the acting kitchen manager, who we will call Susan. The original manager had just recently left the company and put Susan in charge. This didn't seem to bother Susan, as she was eyeing for the kitchen manager job that had recently opened. Susan was a sweetheart, she was nice, and helped me out with everything. I also interviewed with Bob, the camp director, as Susan did not have any hiring or firing power, as she was just an acting manager. The majority of the kitchen staff were also nice and helpful. I made friends with them during the time I worked there. While there was way more than these people, I remember there being around 10 to 15 kitchen staff members during the summer. I am only going to bring up ones that are important to the story. There was Todd, an older guy who lived only a few blocks from the camp and didn't have a car, so he rode his bike in the morning. Who was also a dishwasher. He was my supervisor, but also really nice. Dale, the head cook, had been there for a long time and used to be a cook for the local middle school. Debbie, another cook. Ellie, a kitchen server, later girlfriend, and Boris, a Russian dishwasher who had a sponsorship with the camp as part of their Worldview program. There were 3 other dishwashers, Dumb, Dumber, and Dumbest, who I will call the Dummies, but they are not part of Revenge. Just that there were 3 dishwashers that were the worst. Nobody got along with them, and they couldn't get fired because Susan was acting manager. Now, due to the fact that we were located in at a camp, the staff had full access to the facilities of the camp. This means that during my breaks or off work, if the camp was open, I was allowed to go to the swimming pool, go horseback riding, or even boating. As long as I didn't get in the way of the kids who had a set schedule, it was full access. Susan told me this along with the director of the camp, Bob, during my interview. Bob was also a nice man, but also kind of weird. This is important later on. During the summer, this place was wonderful. I would typically start working the lunch shift, then have an hour lunch break between lunch and dinner. While I was required by state law for a half-hour lunch, Susan gave me an hour, which she did for everyone. Typically, during this hour, I would go swimming or play with the horses. One time, Bob and I went jet boating around the lake, or Ellie and I would make out in the pool. Just typical stuff a teenage boy would do. Most everyone in the kitchen staff loved me, as I was a model employee and helped with just about everything. They loved that they had someone who they could get help with, as the dummies would always mess up. In August, we got the news. The corporation had picked a new kitchen manager, and it was someone from outside the company. Susan was really upset. She had worked so hard for years for this job, and the higher-ups picked someone outside of the company. The new manager was named Karen. The first time we met Karen, she gave a speech how new changes are coming and we will now work as a team, and was condescending at Susan's work. The first thing she did was do a massive cleanup to the large walk-in fridges. The strange thing was, she didn't have the staff do it, but it was, later on we found out, her family cleaning it out. She also hired her husband, Dan, to be the assistant manager, pretty much forcing Susan out. During this time, the camp was starting to transition from a summer camp to an event camp, so the large staff would be cut in half. This wasn't a problem normally, as people would be leaving for school or other seasonal jobs start opening up. The first people she cut were the dummies. Everyone was happy on that, and that was the only good thing she did. But in the end, all that was left was Ellie, Dale, Todd, Debbie, Boris, a few others, and me. I asked Karen if I could work the weekend, as I had high school, and she agreed, since everyone else had wanted to keep me on staff. Karen then begins her terror. It only took a week, but it happened. Her fangs started to show and the power got to her. Each person felt the wrath of her. She was one of those people who thinks their farts doesn't smell. She would come in late, leave early, but yell at everyone for doing the same thing. Everyone had problems with her, but here are a few that I remember. Todd was starting to get written warnings about coming in late. Karen placed him on the morning shift, but he told her that he couldn't do the morning shift or he would be late as he doesn't have a car and bikes into work. As the camp is located in a rural area, it doesn't have street lights and biking in the morning is dangerous. This isn't a problem during the summer as the sun is up earlier, but during the fall and winter, time is not acceptable. She called him lazy for not having a car and it didn't matter, she needed him in here. Dale, the head cook, was starting to get fed up with Karen ordering too little of the food and the wrong food, having cheaper products and being forced to work with a broken stove. One time, he asked her when the stove would be fixed, and her response was, "Fix it yourself, you are a big boy." So oftentimes we would run out of food for the night and had to make sandwiches for the people. Ellie got the worst of it. Since we were dating, I found out that she had an eating disorder a few years earlier. She was 2 years older than me and used to be anorexic. Karen kept calling her piggy and fat and how she shouldn't eat all the food in the kitchen. She was upset and crying the whole time when this happened. I confronted Karen about it and she said she shouldn't be a sheltered college brat and should just grow up. And if she has a problem, she should talk to me, not you. I also felt the wrath of her too. She would change my schedule around randomly after posting it. On Friday, we would get our schedules for the week. I typically worked Friday night, Saturday, and Sunday because of high school. During the week, she would change my schedule, so I was working on Friday night. She changed it to Wednesday night and then would call saying I missed Wednesday night. Unlucky for her, Dale had my number and called me whenever he found a schedule change, but it was getting old quickly. She would also tell me to do a job, then change what to do. For example, one time she told me to clean the oven, and when I was near finishing up on the job, she asked why I didn't clean the stove and get mad when I said she told me to do the oven. Another example was that she would tell me to mop the floor and Boris would come over and help me out because he had nothing to do, and then get on me for Boris finishing my job, even though Boris spoke up and said that he asked her if he could help me and she said yes. Another example was that she cut my break from an hour to half hour and not allowing me to use the facilities during my break since I was only on break to eat, not play. After a few weeks of this, late September, I went to Bob about her and told him everything about what she was doing to us. I found out from Bob that Dale also went to him earlier that week with the same thing. However, having the spine of a jellyfish, he said, "I'll talk with Karen." Then a day later, Karen starts getting on us for going to Bob and not her, saying, "If you have a problem with me, you come to me, not Bob." This was the last straw for us, so I talked with the rest of the kitchen staff and we decided that she needed to leave. During one of my breaks that she wasn't in the office that day, when we were still trying to think of a way to get rid of her, I was eating my dinner in her office. The manager's office was the only one with AC in it and it was a hot day. We all had permission to be in her office as it had the keys to the large fridge, tools, the private restroom, and whatnot. I'm eating dinner with Ellie when Boris comes looking for a pen. He was trying to fill out information so he could go home to Russia. I don't remember what, just that he was planning on leaving in 3 weeks, and sits down at her desk. He is opening up the desk to find a black pen when he finds a check. It was a paycheck to one of the dummies who left a month earlier. It was his final paycheck. Highly illegal to withhold a paycheck. Boris showed us the paycheck, and then he started to look at the computer that was on her desk. While Karen was a jerk, she was also stupid and left everything unlocked. There he saw the orders. She was ordering things that we never got into the kitchen or ordering extra stuff. It turns out that she was ordering more food than we thought, stealing the food, and using it for her own personal use. I told Boris that he was looking through her personal files and he said, "What are they going to do? Deport me?" We also found out that Bob was getting a kickback from the extra food that Karen was getting in to keep quiet. So it explained why Bob had the spine of a jellyfish towards Karen. Boris printed out the information and held onto it. This is important later on. The three of us told Dale about it and he wanted to confront Karen, but Debbie pointed out that she would just deny it and Bob would cover up. We thought about corporate, but we had no connections to corporate, and Susan had left the company who used to have the connections. It then hit on us. In about 3 weeks, mid-October, corporate was going to be having a retreat using the camp. All the bigwigs and high-ups were going to be there, and we were all scheduled to be at work that day because there was going to be a huge feast for dinner, while for lunch, corporate was going to have grilled burgers and hot dogs. I remember that corporate brought in an outside vendor for the grilled stuff since they were preparing a big feast. Karen was also going to be there to impress the bigwigs. We decided to act on that day, but also knew what to do beforehand. It was also going to be Boris's last day as he was leaving to Russia that night. So on the day of the feast, all of us show up on time at around noon. The dinner feast wasn't going to be until 5 p.m., so we had plenty of time to prepare, or at least, that's what Karen thought. We got there and just sat down around the kitchen and did no work. We locked the freezer with a different lock. It was only locked with a normal deadbolt lock you can get at the hardware store. The janitor wasn't going to be in until later in the evening, thanks to Dale telling him about the plan and not to answer the phone, so he couldn't use his tools to break into the fridge. So we waited. Karen didn't get in until 4 p.m. with her husband. She looked as if she was ready for a major interview when she saw all of us just standing around. The stove wasn't on and cold, the fridge was locked, and we were just sitting around. Karen started to yell and talk about how today is important for her and that she would have our heads for this. So Dale comes up to her and says, "We quit." Karen went full on deer in headlights and her mouth was so wide open that you could throw peanuts into it. All of us walked out on her, into our cars, and drove away before she could get a word in. We decided to just quit. After we quit, all of us started to look for jobs, while some had security lined up since we knew that this was going to happen, but knew that a major shakeup like this would grab the attention of the bigwigs. I found out a month later when I got a call from Susan, the original acting manager before Karen, asking me if I wanted my old job back. It turns out that Karen called Bob and said her whole kitchen staff just left and they needed to tell the bigwigs that the feast was going to be canceled. She couldn't get into the fridge with all the food since her key didn't work and nobody was picking up to help her. She tried to call others that left or were fired, but since she was so toxic that nobody wanted to work with her, the bigwigs were not happy. They went right to the kitchen to find out what was wrong and saw that nobody but Bob, Karen, and Dan were there without any food cooking. Boris walks in and Karen starts yelling at him, saying how could he do this to her? Boris then hands the bigwigs the printed information he got from Karen's computer earlier and had made copies of it, gave it to everyone in the room. Boris told me through email that he wasn't sure who was in charge, so he gave everyone in the room the information since he figured one of them had to be a head guy, then got into a taxi and went back to Russia. Corporate started an investigation as soon as that happened. Bob, Karen, and Dan were fired almost right on the spot, and not only did they find out about the withholding checks and backdoor deals with Bob, but also Bob was stealing money from the camp to support a drug habit. Karen and Bob were arrested for fraud and most likely other things. It has been over 20 years, I don't remember everything, but that one stuck out at me. Pretty much the whole camp had a shakeup. Susan took over as the manager, got the job she wanted with a pay raise. She did leave after they gave the job to Karen, but her new job wasn't working out, and about half of the staff came back. I did come back as my parents were helping me out while this was happening. I told them everything in advance, but only for a month, as by that point it was winter and it was costing me more in gas than work. Dale came back to the job along with Debbie, but Ellie and I broke up. It was a summer love anyway. As she moved away for college, Todd never came back and works at a local liquor store. At least last I saw him. I haven't been in that store in about 7 years. So what happened now in my current job that caused me to remember this? Well, I got a call from Dan about a month ago, recently wanting to do some work for him. However, he lived in another state that we aren't licensed to do work in, and that was pretty much the end of the conversation. I decided to Google search her name, but didn't find much information except some court records about the original case from years ago. Dan and Karen do not appear to have any social media page or anything that I can find. I honestly don't care anymore, as it has been over 20 years since this happened, and I'm much happier at my current job. We also have another story on the channel about kitchen staff in a camp who have problems with the people running the camp and how they get their revenge. It makes me wonder just how many camps might be mismanaged and run incorrectly by people who are really just out for themselves. I want to thank OP for posting this story to the ProRevenge subreddit. You can visit them at the links in the description below. Please go there and give them an upvote. Once again, this is Rob from Karma Comic Chameleon saying thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and share it with your friends, and we'll see you in the next one.